Well, one of my favorite symposium speakers is back again this year. Dr. Charlie Hall of Texas A&M is our most requested speaker. Charlie will share with us the post-pandemic monetary value of improved landscapes and urban forests. Charlie is a past president of America in Bloom and now serves in an advisory capacity to our board of directors. You can learn more about Charlie and read his full bio by visiting the speakers section of the conference app. A special thank you to Cicada Seed for sponsoring Charlie's talk today. Charlie, it is great to see you. Welcome back.
Thanks, Linda. Great to see you too. And folks, let me add my own welcome for you being here today. It's going to be a fun 30 minutes, so hang on tight. We got a lot to talk about. I'm going to minimize myself here just so that I can get the PowerPoint going. All right, here we go. The post-pandemic monetary value of improved landscapes and urban forest. Man, what a big subject. For the last few years here at AIB, I've been talking about the various benefits of plants, and certainly the pandemic had an influence on the amount of flower, shrubs, and trees that people used. I'd say consumed, but we don't really consume them. We use them. And we use them for various purposes within our lives. We think it's all about aesthetics, but we know that it's not all about aesthetics. It's about health and well-being benefits. It's about environmental ecosystem services. And if we can just translate all of those benefits into money, that's where the power begins, because that's when we're able to articulate our value proposition as an organization, right? So let's get into this. First, I want to start by talking about the executive summary. Everybody's got an agenda that they usually follow within the presentation. I'm going to give you my take-home points right at the very beginning so you don't forget them, right? Number one, in addition to providing beauty, residential and municipal landscapes provide a lot of benefits economically, environmentally, as I said, and also from a health and well-being standpoint. And we just got, well, I'd say we just got through, but we're still in the midst of a health-related crisis. And we know that that flowers, shrubs, and trees and beautification provides a great deal of physiological and psychological benefits. In fact, I was attempting to update my 2011 article, which I talked about all of these types of benefits. And in 2019, along with a PhD student and myself, we started with the health and wellness benefits. And we couldn't fit it into one journal article. We had to write 4 journal articles, dos, tres, cuatro, 4 journal articles just on the health and well-being benefits of what you do every day in America in Bloom. 4 journal articles packed full of all the benefits from a physiological standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, and then also from a social standpoint. And we looked at all those benefits. And they're very, very powerful. Second point on the board. In the wake of this global COVID pandemic, city and community budgets are certainly constrained, right? We've had to spend a lot on safety and other dimensions of life in a post-COVID. Well, I keep saying post-COVID, but we're not exactly post-COVID. We're in the midst of it still. Although we'd like for it to be behind us, we still have a lot of things that we're wrestling with, and we will wrestle with for the next several years. But my point is that budgets are constrained, and the ROI related to beautification projects is all that more important. So it's one of the reasons we're taking another look at this monetary value of AIB beautification. Historically, this has led to a decrease in green spaces, that is, the constrained budgets. Cities have elected to do other things rather than spend their money on green. And however, recent research has shown that the ROI resulting from investments in green infrastructure and urban forests is one of the most effective economic development tools. Now, this green infrastructure term, I've used that before in some of my previous conversations, but this is the reason I use that language is because that's the language that municipal and city leaders use. They talk about gray infrastructure, talk about green infrastructure, even in the federal budget and the infrastructure package. That's how those types of beautification projects, they don't call them beautification projects. They call them green infrastructure projects. And oh yeah, some of them just happen to be outstandingly beautiful. All right, so this is my 3-point sermon for the day, if you will. Now let's talk about some of the details. And everything that I'm talking about is under this moniker of biophilia. And I'm not the first to use that term. Our own Katie Moss Warner has used the term biophilia perhaps more than anybody else I know. And she's always a proponent, as everybody within the AIB board and all the members of America in Bloom across the country are big proponents of biophilia. That's the innate desire to surround ourselves with living things, both animal and plants. It's just that animals have a competitive advantage, right? They come up and lick our face, and I'd say something good about cats, but I can't think anything right off the top of my head. So I know I'll get a few comments about that one. But biophilia, this is the plant life. Though plants are static, not dynamic, they don't move except when they wave in the wind and so forth. But they provide great deal, as much benefit to the human psyche as do animals. All right, so let's talk about urban green infrastructure. Move myself out of the way here a little bit. And there's a lot of different components of green infrastructure: green walls, green roofs, suburban street trees, all the green spaces within our communities, etc. So these are things that are all within the green infrastructure umbrella. All right, so let's talk about some of these things. How are we rethinking the problem? One of the biggest money needs within any community across the country is to mitigate stormwater runoff, because there are so many issues. And so one of the things that cities can do is to invest in green infrastructure, and you can see all the different benefits that are in green here: property values, air quality, aesthetics, of course, recreation, energy savings, water quality. And there's many different tools that are used to supply those needs. And it's the cities that are proactive, the communities that are proactive, and using these things synergistically, not just throwing silver bullets at different issues, but when they start thinking about the solutions of these problems synergistically, it oftentimes involves multiple types of green infrastructure tools. Now, let's talk about some of these categories of economic benefits. To do that, I'm going to rely on a publication that came out in 2018. It's not that old, but man, is it good. It doesn't matter if it was 2013 or 2008. I mean, it's that good in terms of the information that it provides. And so there's a lot of economic benefits that are summarized in this publication. I'm kind of using that as a jumping off point for this particular discussion. And I want to show you a few pages. I mean, you can go back and you can search. You can go back a slide here. You can search for this particular publication, Evaluating Landscape Performance, a guidebook for metrics and methods. Because again, we can talk about benefits all day long, and I do all day long. But you've got to transform those benefits into dollars in order to capture people's attention, particularly local and statewide legislators and those that have the power and the purse strings. All right, so this particular publication, Economic Benefits, is a chapter within it, and it talks about 7 different types of benefits. And you can see that for each type of benefit, it has an introduction, and it talks about some of the assessment considerations for the difficulties in coming up with the monetary value. But it does give you some potential metrics, like this one, the very first one, property value, adding value to the site or adjacent properties. Well, that's all well and good, but how do you get there? Well, you take metrics like this increase in assessed value, sales price, or rents, and those are publicly available data, And you could look at the average increase in assessed value, sales price, or rental rates of nearby properties. And again, you can see over time how green influences these either sales prices or rental rates within properties. And they've got a good example on every single benefit. They talk about an example. One is the tongue-tied today. Renaissance Park in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it catalyzed an 821% increase in aggregate land value within a quarter mile of the park, right? So those residences, those businesses that are closer to these green spaces end up selling for more, and they increase in property value. Now, the counter to that is gentrification. And right now I have a PhD student that's looking at that sole issue of gentrification. Because if there's one argument that could be made against AIB activities, it's that we enhance the areas and we increase property values. And so those residents that are in the area, if they are of a socioeconomic status where they cannot afford those higher rental rates or those higher sales prices, then that's a, it's kind of a hidden form of the structural challenges that we have within making sure that have fair and equal access and so forth. So that's gentrification is one of the things that we're studying, and particularly the ways in which you can combat gentrification. So just know that that's an issue. It's good. It generates additional tax revenue and so forth, but it can be devastating for those that are pushed out of an area who've lived there their entire lives and are pushed out because of the rising rental rates or what have you. Now, I've talked before about the $1.09 for every $1 of landscaping investment that's made in private residences. That still holds true, right? Those that are adjacent to parks, their values are increased from 8 to 10%. Now, if you're a homeowner in these areas and you add more green and you're increasing those property values, yeah, you got to pay more taxes, but it makes your house worth more whenever you sell it. Again, are you approaching it from the buyer standpoint or seller standpoint? Trees alone can add 3 to 15% to property value. So again, what we do offers tremendous monetary value. Now, operations and maintenance savings and reducing ongoing costs associated with operations and upkeep. When we introduce green infrastructure rather than gray infrastructure, we oftentimes minimize or mitigate the maintenance cost that goes along with maintaining gray infrastructure. Instead of putting in redundant piping to handle stormwater, why don't we put in green infrastructure, the urban tree canopy, to slow that water down so that we don't have some of the issues that we have with flooding, erosion, and so forth. Some of the potential metrics, water savings, right? The cost of water is actually higher in this country than what we pay for water. We subsidize water rather dramatically. Now, those on the West Coast have a little better feel for the actual cost of water because water's more expensive out there and it's priced really from an economics. Remember, I'm an economist. From an economics standpoint, it's priced more appropriately in the western part of the country than it is in any other part of the country. The time is coming that we will be forced to pay the true cost of water at some point rather than the subsidized cost of water. When that happens, horticulture plays a very significant role in terms of water savings, right? It's not an investment of water that's required. You got to keep pouring water at these plants and so forth. These plants are offering environmental ecosystem services that help save water and helps save more water in the long run than the water it took to keep those trees alive or what have you. Savings on energy costs and savings on maintenance costs. And of course, there's another example here that's provided in the publication. I won't go into it, but it's this Carmel, Indiana Central Park and the use of grasses rather than native plant species rather than just putting in turf grass. Now, this particular slide I've used before. I bring it back because it makes a very important point that the urban tree canopy provides a tremendous air filtration service to communities and cities at large. And by removing a lot of ozone, particulate matters, and nitrous oxide, so forth. So if you could look, there's about $300 billion worth of structural value that trees and urban parks provide in the U.S., and there's significant benefits in terms of air temperature reduction, pollution removals, about $500 million per year. They store about $1.6 billion worth of carbon in their roots and canopy, and of course the carbon removal is worth about $50 million per year. So it adds up to real dollars. There's a concept that some of our friends in the landscape architectural world would recognize called net zero water use. And in LEED certified buildings, the Green Building Council has spent a lot of time on this particular concept in basically saying that for the cities of the future will be comprised of green buildings with net zero water use, and that the water consumption in the building is going to be mitigated by the water capturing and filtration systems outside the building, right? So it's this very important role for green infrastructure within our country. Now, researchers have found that impervious surfaces can also cause things to go awry, that the more permeable surfaces are. You see all these red dots in here, and the darker the areas, the greater the concentration of red dots. But each dot means that there's a lot of gray infrastructure there, and the temperatures are rising considerably, right? So 1 degree C may not sound like much, but I say over here it's enough to push up air conditioning use by 20%, right? So this global phenomena that we're seeing in the urban heat island effect is what's charging some of the climate change that we're seeing. And again, much of this is because of these gray infrastructure services, a lot of paving, concrete, and so forth. Now, a mature tree canopy reduces air temperatures by about 5 to 10 degrees and also reduces the internal temperatures of buildings, so that a 125-foot tree reduces annual heating and cooling costs by 8 to 12%. Isn't that an incredible fact? I mean, that factoid should be on every sales brochure of every landscape company in America. All right, now, I talk about the urban tree canopy, reducing and mitigating the runoff. This tree canopy reduces 1-inch rain runoff by as much as 17%, right? And so the 2/3 of a rain event can be captured in the canopy of the tree and then released slowly as the water drips off the leaves, rather than all this washing out and flooding that you see in certain areas. So before Hurricane Ike, the city of Houston had some major green infrastructure projects that they were putting in place to mitigate flooding in Houston, because every time it would have these big horrendous rains here in Texas, the city of Houston would flood. And of course, when Ike hit, you had all 54 counties along the Texas Gulf Coast that needed mitigated repairs. So a lot of those monies were used up in that, unfortunately, because we didn't get to correct the issue. Now, street trees also reduce the UV light and the UV degradation that occurs to streets. And one study from UC Davis, not US Davis, UC Davis, that's going to bug me, right? So I got to go in here and I got to change that on the fly. All right, that's the educator in me. This professor, I can't stand it. They had a typo there. Now, I can breathe easier. A study from UC Davis found that 20% shade on the street reduces the paving cost by 11%, which is a 60% savings over a 30-year horizon. Now, next type of benefits, construction cost savings, and reducing one-time benefits associated with project implementation. And by reusing areas, green infrastructure, reducing earthwork costs and hauling disposal fees, etc. Again, it's a savings in dollars. Number 4, job creation, right? There's 7 of them. This is number 4. Providing employment as part of construction or ongoing operations. You've heard me say before, there's almost 2 million jobs created in the green industry alone. And then when you take the parks and recreation related jobs within cities, it's another several million jobs. And so every project like this Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, Texas, right? It's just this one little park right here. 8 full-time and 5 part-time jobs in maintenance operations, 68 temporary jobs were during design and construction phase, right? So a lot of the, again, legislators, city officials respond to jobs, right? Tax revenue, jobs, etc. So these numbers of jobs mount up, and there's the 2.3 million jobs just in the green industry alone. Now, people travel to places that look good, so visitor spending and earned income is a very important part of the economic benefits, and the generating revenues from those who visit and use the site. They got to live stay somewhere, right? Maybe they move there. They like it so much, but they got to stay somewhere while they're there. And this Mount Rushmore Visitor Center's redevelopment right here, and they got to stay somewhere. They got to eat stuff. So again, there's all kinds of tourism revenues that are generated. So you can revenue or net revenue from sales, net revenue from entrance or park fees, parking fees, facilities rentals, visitor spending, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be substantial. Now, another example of that is total economics of the Florida Botanic Gardens are $113.9 million. An additional $1,584 jobs. I talked about this several years ago when I talked about the agritourism and the overall economic development benefits of beautification of AIB. That was like 6 years ago, and updated that figure. Total travel-related outputs more than $2.5 trillion in 2018. And there are 15.7 million jobs associated with this tourism. Chihuly in the park, right? That's another great example. Of course, there's Chihuly exhibits around the country. Just in Phoenix, 630,000 annual attendees, generating $22 million, right? That's just fascinating. And of course, tax revenue, generating revenues through property and sales taxes. As you see in Bagby Street in Houston, as you add green infrastructure and you make these streets and avenues, sidewalks more beautiful, it does increase property values, and they contributed $53 million, 26% increase in property taxes from 2013 to 2015 when they reconstructed Bagby Street alone, right? That's one street. And lastly, but not least, economic development, catalyzing real estate and business development. Again, you have a number of projects. The Erie Street Plaza in Milwaukee is being an example. The 243 condominium units, $120 million investment capital going into this formerly rundown area, right? So the increase or decrease in vacancy rate, number of new businesses, all those are potential metrics for measuring this. Now, we know that when people take the time to beautify their businesses, there's more people that come and visit those businesses, and they're willing to pay more. In fact, shoppers spend 9 to 12% more time with a high tree canopy density, spend more time. They spend 9 to 12% more on merchandise and are willing to pay 17% more for it. That's an amazing statistic. 7% higher rental rates and higher occupancy rates in business complexes and apartment complexes, condominium complexes that are properly landscaped. And of course, office plants decrease sick time by employees by 14%, and about a $200 to $2,200 reduction in average annual healthcare costs per adult. Now, this study over here on the right, the 8-year study, showed that women living in areas with more vegetation, 12% less mortality rate. That is amazing, right? The only difference between the two areas was the amount of green and 12% lower mortality rate, right? So I'm going to finish up. This is my last slide, resources. Obviously, you can go to the American Bloom website. There's a plethora of benefits of plants-related information. There's my Ellison Chair homepage, my own website. You can Google Charlie Hall, Texas A&M. It's the Ellison Chair in International Floriculture. You can go to that website, and there's a ton of resources on there as well. But there's one more that will help you that's put out by the cities nature technology. I forget exactly what CNT stands for, but they have this publication that talks about green infrastructure benefits and practices. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this is that in the appendix, it has all these examples of how you can calculate all the benefits I've been talking about. The previous publication also has in the appendix some examples of how to calculate the monetary benefits of green infrastructure, right? I didn't want this to be a math lesson, so I just wanted to talk about this particular publication as well as the one from the Landscape Architecture Foundation. Those are two really good resources to help you in calculating what your overall impact is from a monetary standpoint in your city and community. All right, so remember that. You got American Bloom, you got my Ellison Chair website. Oh, one more is the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture, NICH, as we finally referred to it. Dr. Marvin Miller and I are on the economic committee within that organization, another 501c3, kind of a sister organization to us. And there's a series of infographics that you can use, again, to give to decision makers to help them know that plants do this, that the little factoids about the benefits of plants in communities and cities across the country. So that's it, folks. That's my presentation. I'm going to close now because I want to leave plenty of time for any questions that we might have. So thank you very much.